Hi everyone. So in this particular lesson, I'm going to be covering section 2.3. I'm going to be breaking this section up into multiple lessons. We're going to be focusing on integers for the equations that we solved today. I'll also show you how to check. So you'll want a notebook and something to write with. And I'm going to be doing these problems without the use of a calculator with my students, but you'll just want to double check what's appropriate and allowed for your class if you're not with me. So take a moment to copy this information that you see on the board. So when we're solving a multi-step equation, so as the name implies, it's going to take multiple steps to get our answer. We want to simplify each side of the equation as much as possible. And then after we do that, we should have a 1 or 2 step equation that we know how to solve. So I like to break things down into different steps. So for multi-step equations where the variable's on one side only, I like to break it down into about 4 steps. So step 1, you're going to want to distribute if you see parentheses. Obviously, if there aren't any parentheses, you won't need to worry about this, but if we do see parentheses, we must distribute first. The next thing that we want to look for is if we have any like terms that we need to combine. So step 2, combine like terms. And then steps 3 and 4 just come from the previous lessons that we've covered. At this point, it should be a 1 or 2 step equation. If it's a 2-step, the first thing that we're going to do is add and subtract the constant to both sides. And again, the constant is just the number that's not attached or dependent upon a variable. It's just a number by itself. And then at that point, it should be a 1-step, which means that we need to either multiply or divide the coefficient to both sides. So in other words, we multiply or divide by the number that's directly touching that variable or is dependent on that variable. Okay, so make sure that you've got all of this information in your notes before we move on. Pause or rewind if need be. And let's go ahead and dive into a practice problem. Okay, so take a moment to copy this equation. If you still like to draw your line down your equal sign, go ahead and do that. I'm just going to run through all of those steps as I attempt to simplify and then solve this equation. So again, I want to start by looking at the side that has the variable, because we only have variables on one side in section 2.3. And the first thing that I want to look for is, do we have parentheses? I don't see parentheses here, so I don't need to distribute and can skip that step. I do have some like terms, however. I have a variable term here and a variable term here. I can combine the two. Just remember, if you see a minus variable, there's really an invisible 1, okay? Same with if it said plus b, there's an invisible 1. So I have -1 plus 8. If I combine those, and I'm just going to copy everything else down, -1 plus 8 would give me a +7. So this is going to read plus 7b. And at this point, it's a 2-step. So I'm going to subtract my constant first. That's the number I got to get rid of first. So I'm going to subtract the 3. 24 minus 3 gives me 21. I bring down the 7b, and now it's a 1-step. The number is touching the variable, which means multiplication, so I have to divide both sides by 7, and I get 3 as my answer. So here's all of the work that would be required that you would show in order to receive full credit for a problem like this. You can also check your answer, and some of the teachers might require you to check your answer. Even if they don't, though, go ahead and write this in your notebook anyways. It's important to understand how to check your answer. So we just got that our answer was 3 equals b or b equals 3. It doesn't matter which way you write it. It means the same thing. And in order to do a check, we're going to replace everywhere where we see a B, we're going to replace it with that number that we just got as an answer. It's important to understand that when you're doing a check, you're not solving. You're just substituting and then evaluating like we learned how to do in a previous lesson. So I'm going to rewrite this equation, and then everywhere where I see a B, I'm going to replace it with a 3. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter if you use parentheses or not, but I always like to substitute in parentheses because in some cases it will make a difference. You just want to make sure that you're not doing the operations incorrectly. Like when I substitute for this B for the second term, if I don't use parentheses, it's going to look like this. It's going to look like an 83, but I don't want it to read 83. I want to use parentheses so it reads 8 times 3. So when in doubt, use parentheses. Sometimes it doesn't make a difference, but sometimes it does. Now that I've substituted everything in, I can just use order of operations. So anywhere where I see a math operation, I'm going to do that until each side of my equation reads one number, and then I see if both sides match. If they do, I got the right answer. So order of operations says I need to multiply before I can add and subtract. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm just going to copy everything else down. 8 times 3 gives me 24. And now I just add and subtract left to right. 3 minus 3 gives me 0. 0 plus 24 gives me 24. So they match. This works out. So B does, in fact, equal 3. We got the right answer. Let's do another problem. So go ahead, copy this one in your notes as well. So step 1, distribute if we see parentheses. I do see parentheses here, so I am going to have to take this 8 and multiply it with both of these terms inside. Remember, when you distribute, you're multiplying. The negative 96 comes down along with my equal sign. 8 times B gives me 8B. 8 times 6 will give me 48. Okay, and then at this point, it is a 2-step equation. I don't have any terms to combine, so I can skip that step. So I can just move on to adding or subtracting the constant to both sides. The constant on the side that has the variable is the negative 48. The opposite of this negative or subtracting would be to add it. They're going to cancel on the right, and I do the same thing to the left. So here, 96 and 48, their signs are different, so I'm going to have to take their difference. So off to the side, I'm going to do a little work. I'm going to pretend that both of the numbers are positives and stack the larger number on top of the smaller one. I can't do 6 minus 8, so I'm going to have to borrow from this 9, turn it into an 8, and the 6 becomes a 16. 16 minus 8 is 8. 8 minus 4 is 4. So I'm getting 48 as my difference, but I just want to double check, is it a positive or a negative? So you look at the number that is furthest from 0 or the number that looks bigger, okay? The number that looks bigger is the 96, so I match that sign, which is negative. I bring down my equals 8b, and I keep going to solve the one step. The number is touching the variable. That means multiplication, so I must divide to get my answer. Negative 48 divided by positive 8 is going to give me a negative 6 as my quotient. Remember, a positive and a negative, when you multiply or divide, gives you a negative, regardless of the order, regardless if you're multiplying or dividing, and regardless of which number is furthest from 0. Okay, so we're getting negative 6 equals b. So on the next slide, negative 6 equals b. I'm going to check my answer, and you should be doing the same thing in your notes as well. So take a moment to recopy the equation, and somewhere near there, you want to write the answer, and we're going to substitute and evaluate. So again, everywhere where I see this variable, I'm going to replace it with -6. So in this particular case, if multiple parentheses is throwing you off, you can always substitute using a different type of grouping symbol. You can use brackets, you can use braces, you can change these parentheses to brackets or braces, or if you can recognize that here the parentheses won't make a difference, you can actually substitute without. Just be careful if you're substituting without. Make sure that it's definitely not going to affect your answer. Okay, so at this point, I can just use order of operations to get my answer. So again, if you're not familiar with the acronym PEMDAS, and I should have mentioned this when we did the first check, each of these letters represents how you want to evaluate in order. Parentheses means do everything in the parentheses first, or the P stands for parentheses rather. So that's what I'm going to do. The 8 comes down for the ride. Now it's important that if you see a number touching a set of parentheses, when I do what's in this parentheses, I'm not dropping the parentheses. I still want to show that this 8 is going to get multiplied with whatever is in here. -6 minus 6, their signs are the same, so I add and get 12, and I match them for their sign. I match the negative. E is for exponents, which we don't have. The next thing I want to do is multiply or divide left to right. I see multiplication here, so I'm going to multiply. So again, you might want to do this off to the side if you don't have your times tables memorized, so I'll just show you guys how to do that. You would stack the 8 underneath the 12. 8 times 2 is 16, carry my 1. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 1 more is 9, and it should be a negative because my signs were different here. So I'm getting the same answer on both sides, which means that -6 does in fact equal B. Let's try an even harder one. So now I see parentheses, but I see some other things that I'm going to have to eventually take care of as well. Step 1 is always the same. I must distribute first. A lot of students will actually see a problem that looks like this, and they'll try and do this part first. So off to the side here, I'm actually just going to show you what not to do, just so that way you're aware. You may even want to include this in your notes. Don't do this. Okay, I'm going to rewrite the problem and show you guys what I see some of my students doing sometimes. Some of my students want to combine these two numbers out here and get a -10 and then distribute. Okay, this is wrong. You cannot do that. Please don't try to combine any like terms until after you've distributed. You must distribute first. And in this case, we're not just distributing the 2 that's touching the parentheses, but we're also distributing this negative here. So be mindful of that. Always look to the left of the number touching the parentheses to ensure that you're distributing the correct value. The -8 is just going to come down for the ride. Just going to bring that down in my next line of work. And then I multiply to get my 2 products. -2 times 5b is going to give me a -10b. -2 times -6 is going to give me a positive, because the 2 negatives cancel when I multiply, a positive 12. This is why it's so important to first check on the sign that you're distributing, because if I had written -12 here, I would have gotten a completely different and incorrect answer as I continue to solve. Step 1 is done, we distributed. Step 2, we look for like terms. On the side that contains the variable, I have a constant of -8 and a constant of 12. I can combine those, and remember, my signs are different, so I'm going to take their difference, and I'm just going to bring my -10b down for the ride. I have more positives than negatives, so I know that whatever answer I get, it's going to be a positive. And let's see, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. My difference is going to give me 4. You could have also written the positive 4 out here. Just keep in mind when you do that, it's going to look like a subtraction problem. So you might have written it like this. I'll write it over here. So if you wrote the 4 first, just keep in mind that this 10b should still have a negative in front of it, okay? All right, at this point, it's a 2-step, so I can subtract my constant. I get negative 10b, oops, equals 80. And the last step is to multiply or divide. The number's touching the variable, which means multiplication. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 10. Remember, when you multiply or divide, you don't change the sign. You leave it the same. 80 divided by negative 10. Hopefully you can do that in your head. 80 divided by 10 should give us 8, and it should be a negative because my signs were different. I just realized that all of these equations have the variable b. That was not intentional. Let's do a check for that answer. So in your notes, you'll want to rewrite the equation, and we just got negative 8 as our answer. So just like last time, I'm going to substitute everywhere I see that variable and replace it with negative 8. Everything else is going to remain exactly the same. So it's still going to read negative 8 minus 2, open parentheses, 5. And now it's really important that I do use parentheses or at least some sort of multiplication symbol, right? I'm multiplying this 5 and this b together. That's what it means when a number touches a variable. So I'm just going to substitute my negative 8 in the parentheses, so I now see that when I do this operation here, it's multiplication. I'm going to subtract 6, and this is equal to 84. Okay, so I might just throw up this acronym again so we can reference it. P is for parentheses, so I do everything in this parentheses first. Everything else stays exactly the same. In the parentheses, I actually have to reference my order of operations again because I have 2 operations to do in the parentheses. I have multiplication and subtraction. I have to multiply before I can subtract. 5 times negative 8 is going to give me a negative 40. And I'm just going to bring down that negative 6. Notice how I didn't drop these parentheses on the outside. Don't do that until you're absolutely certain that it's not going to affect your answer. Here, I know that I need my parentheses throughout because this negative 2 is touching, so it's going to get multiplied with whatever is going to end up being inside. I still have one operation to take care of in my parentheses. Negative 40 minus 6. Signs are the same, so I'm going to add them and match the negative sign. I'm still going to follow my order of operations. Now, I do see parentheses, but I can actually move on from this step because it's down to one singular number. And my next step I don't have to worry about, which is exponents, so I can skip that. But I do need to multiply. This negative 2, and again, it is a negative 2 that I'm multiplying, not a positive. I'm multiplying negative 2 with negative 46. I'm going to do that work off to the side. I'm going to ignore the signs for now and just multiply. 6 times 2 gives me 12, carry the 1. 2 times 4 gives me 8, plus the 1 I carried is 92. So I bring down my negative 8 because I haven't done anything with it yet. And now I'm getting 92 as my product, but I need to determine, is it a plus 92, a positive, or is it a minus 92, a negative? Well, again, look at the signs that we multiplied together. The 2 is negative, the 46 was negative. Their signs matched, so they canceled and gave me a positive. And my last step is to combine these 2 constants by either adding or subtracting them. Their signs are different, so I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to pretend they're both positives. Bigger number goes on top of the smaller. I borrow from the 9 to make this an 8, which makes the 2 a 12. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 4 is my difference. 8 minus nothing is just 8. So I'm getting an 84. And I should leave it a positive because the 92 looks bigger. So I'm getting the correct answer because it matches on both sides. Okay, here is another example. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to copy it down. We have two sets of parentheses here. We need to make sure that we're distributing for both groups. So it's always going to be the number that's touching that you'll distribute into that group. For this first group, I only see a negative. But remember, just like in that very first equation that we solved where it said minus b, there's really a -1 there. Same idea here. There's a -1 touching this parentheses, and I only distribute it to the terms inside this group, this set of parentheses. For the next set of parentheses, I'm distributing a +3 to both of these numbers. -76 equals comes down, and I just start multiplying. -1 times -5n gives me a +5n. -1 times -7 gives me a +7. +3 times +3n gives me a +9n. And 3 times 5 will give me a +15. Notice how every time I multiplied after I wrote that first term, I was putting a plus or minus in between those terms. You need to make sure that you're doing that so A, you know the sign of your number, and B, you know if it's a term that's being added or subtracted and not multiplied. Step 2, I look for terms to combine. I have a variable term and a variable term. Both are positive, so I can add them together and get 14 in. I also have a constant and a constant. I can add those together because they're both positives, and I get a positive, let's see, that's going to give me 22, if I'm doing that correctly in my head. If you're not sure if you're doing it correctly in your head, stack the numbers off to the side and add down the columns. 7 plus 5 gives me 12, carry the 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. So there's my answer for that number. Now it's a two-step. Undo the constant by adding or subtracting. We want to subtract first. Subtract because it was positive. My signs are the same here. They are both negatives, so I need to add them together. So off to the side, I'm just going to do that work. 6 plus 2 gives me 8. 7 plus 2 gives me 9. So it's a 98, but it's still a negative because we were adding here. We were not multiplying or dividing, so it should stay a negative. And I bring my 14 down for the ride. Now I have to divide since that number is touching the variable. And I don't know my 14s off the top of my head, and you might not either. So I might do a little guess and check. If I multiply 14 with 1, that's just going to give me 14. So let's see what happens if I multiply it with 2 and see how close to 98 I get. 4 times 2 gives me 8. That's good. I want my answer to end in an 8. But 2 times 1 gives me 2. So that's not close. So let me try another number. I'm going to multiply 14 with 7 because I know that when I do 4 times 7, it's going to give me 28, which ends in an 8. So I'm kind of using logic to figure out what number should I try next based off of the fact that this number ends in an 8. So it gives me 28, and I carry the 2. 7 times 1 gives me 7, plus 2 more gives me the 9 that I need. So 7 should be my answer. That's my quotient. But it should be a -7 because, again, negative divided by positive gives us negative. And just like before, we'll do a check. So we got -7, if my memory serves me correct. Hopefully that was what was on the last screen. Okay, so just like last time, I'm going to substitute everywhere where I see the variable n. Careful with your parentheses. If using the parentheses is too confusing, again, you can use a different grouping symbol or a multiplication symbol of some sort. You just want to show that when we substitute here, this -5 is going to get multiplied with this number, okay? So I'm going to substitute everywhere where I see an n. I'll just substitute in parentheses, but you use some multiplication symbol that you're comfortable with. Notice how I still need to write these outermost parentheses, even though I substituted using parentheses here. So just keep that in mind. 3 is going to get multiplied with -7 as well, +5, and close that parentheses. All right, so again, I'm just going to follow order of operations, which says do everything in parentheses first. So I'm going to do what's in this parentheses and also what's in this parentheses. In this first parentheses, I need to multiply before I can subtract. Again, I'm not going to drop my parentheses yet. So -5 times -7 will give me +35. I bring down the -7 parentheses. And I'm going to multiply here as well, because that's what I have to do first in this group before I can add. 3 times -7 gives me -21 plus 5 parentheses. Now I can just subtract in this first group. So 35 minus 7, if I do that work off to the side, I'm going to have to borrow from the 3. And then 15 minus 7, that's going to give me 8. And then 2 minus nothing gives me 2. So it should be a positive 28 since the 35 was positive. Plus 3 parentheses. Signs are different here as well, so I do have to subtract here. Again, if you need to do that off to the side, you would just have to borrow to make that 1 and 11. 11 minus 5 would give me 6. 1 minus nothing gives me 1. But it's a -16 since the 21 is further from 0. And now these numbers on the outside, I just multiply. So again, this negative is really just a -1. -1 times 28 is just going to give me -28. 3 times 16 I'll do off to the side. I'll stack and multiply. 6 times 3 gives me 18. 3 times 1 plus 1 more gives me 4. And it's a -48 because positive times negative gives me negative. Last but not least, I have to combine my like terms here, which are both constants. They're both negative, so I'm going to add them together. So I'm going to take this 48 and just add the 28. I'm going to pretend they're both positive just to see what I get for my sum first. 8 plus 8 gives me 16, carry the 1. 4 plus 2 gives me 6, plus 7 gives me a 7. So this side has a -76, and this side has a -76. So we found the correct solution. Oh, and then that was my last slide, so we'll end it here. Good luck with all of the problems, you guys, and see you next time.